accurate information. First things first today, I want to break some news. We have record-breaking early voting turnout in North Carolina. Last evening, we cruised past the record set in 2020, and as of 10 a.m. this morning, nearly 3,705,000 North Carolinians have cast their ballot at one of the 420 early voting sites across the state. That beats the total early voting turnout of 2020, when more than 3,629,000 voters turned out to vote early. And we still have 2 very busy early voting days ahead of us. Through Thursday, nearly 3.9 million ballots have been cast statewide. That's 49% of the state's 7.8 million registered voters. We will easily hit 50% turnout today. Our communications team will send out a press release with details about this very shortly. Second, we want to remind voters who still plan to vote by mail that it may be too late to put your ballot in the regular mail stream and ensure it gets back to your County Board of Elections office by the deadline, which is next Tuesday, Election Day, at 7:30 p.m. Again, 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, November 5th, is when your absentee ballot must be delivered to your County Board of Elections for it to count. Even if you can't be sure the regular mail will get your ballot to the County Board by next Tuesday, you still have options. You can do any of the following. Send your ballot overnight or express using the Postal Service or a private delivery service. Hand deliver the ballot to any early voting site in the county where you are registered to vote. Then the in-person early voting period ends at 3 p.m. Saturday. So again, hand deliver the ballot to an early voting site in the county where the voter is registered to vote, and the in-person early voting period ends at 3 p.m. Saturday. There's also the option to drop your ballot off at your County Board of Elections office during operating hours of 7 and do that by 7:30 p.m. November the 5th. Finally, if you are one of the 25 counties in the Helene disaster area in Western North Carolina, you can drop off your ballot at any early voting site in the state, or the State Board of Elections office, or at any County Board of Elections office in the state. Again, the deadline is 7:30 p.m. November 5th. And of course, if you have received an absentee ballot but have not yet returned it, you can discard it and vote in person instead of during early voting, you can discard it instead and vote in person during early voting or on election day. Also this morning, I want to take a bit of time to talk about our election day preparations. More than 2,600 polling places across North Carolina will be open to voters at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Polls will be open until 7:30 p.m. We anticipate well over 1 million voters will cast their ballot on Election Day. In Western North Carolina, almost all Election Day voting sites that were planned before Hurricane Helene will still be operational. For those handful of precincts where there is no physical structure available to host voting due to storm damage, the State Board of Elections has worked with state and federal partners to set up secure tents to take the place of Election Day voting places. These alternate voting sites are now set up at 7 locations, 4 in Yancey County and 1 each in Buncombe, Burke, and Haywood counties. These 20-foot by 66-foot festival tents include 2 sets of double doors, side walls, lighting, tables, chairs, and of course, in this case, voting booths. They are powered by generators. They also include standard portable bathrooms with hand washing stations. They are monitored around the clock to ensure voting materials are secure. With the help of our partners in state and federal government, we have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure Western North Carolinians have access to the polls, both through early voting and on Election Day. And in fact, voter turnout in the 25 Helene disaster counties continue to outpace voter turnout statewide. We are very proud to say that, and tremendously proud, and of the resilient and strong people of Western North Carolina. Now, I want to speak to all North Carolina voters, and this is extremely important. Election officials in this state have done and will continue to do everything in our power to conduct a fair, secure, and accessible election under the laws of North Carolina. Every single piece of voting equipment has been tested before this election. All early voting sites and Election Day polling places are staffed with bipartisan, trained officials who swear an oath to uphold the law. Election observers appointed by the political parties also are present at voting sites, adding extra eyes to make sure processes and laws are followed. And trust me, they do not hesitate to let us know if they spot any problems or concerns. Across North Carolina, voters are voting with paper ballots, either marked by hand or with a ballot marking device, and each voter inserts their ballot into a tabulator for counting. And after the election, all county boards of elections will conduct post-election audits to verify the counts of those tabulators. Should any recounts be necessary for especially close contests, those recounts will be conducted according to the processes set by law. Finally, I want to ask all North Carolinians, the voters, the campaigners, the poll workers, and the candidates, be kind and civil to each other in the coming days. Allow your fellow North Carolinians to cast their ballots in peace and allow everyone to participate in our great democracy without fear of intimidation. If we all do our parts, this will be an accessible election. This will be a secure election. This will be a safe election, and this will be a fair election. And with that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
All right. Thank you, Karen. We have a lot of questions, so try to cruise through these as quickly as we can. We will start with, give me 1 second here. Kurt Devine from CNN. Kurt, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Two quick questions, if I can. The first one I think is ultra easy, just a logistics question. On Tuesday, will there be press availability? Well, first off, is the state board going to be posting up at the Emergency Operations Center there in Raleigh? And will there be press availability, particularly at night, just in case there are, questions that arise?
We do plan to do another press availability. We'll be getting information out about this following this press availability, but we are planning for Monday morning, Tuesday morning, and potentially Wednesday morning. We don't have a set press availability planned for Tuesday night. We can consider that, but we usually leave that more to as events arise or circumstances in terms of whether we would schedule another press availability for Tuesday night.
Got it. And just as a kind of follow-up, thinking about Tuesday night, I'm wondering if you might even be able to preemptively address certain questions and even possible conspiracy theories that might arise on Tuesday. And if you could just spell out again the process of how votes coming in, I'll put it this way. If there are questions around, say, 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. of people wondering, why don't we know the outcome of the election in North Carolina already? What's taking so long? Are they cheating? What would you say to those sorts of questions?
Well, we have already put out information, and we will continue to put out information about how our processes work. And we appreciate that there's been a great effort to also explain that each state has different processes in terms of what ballots they're able to process in advance and then tabulate, and which ones cannot be. In North Carolina, our absentee by mail ballots can be tabulated during a meeting of the bipartisan county boards on Tuesday afternoon, and they can be uploaded when the polls close at 7:30 p.m. We have had a change in when our early voting ballots can be uploaded. And obviously, we've just talked about how many millions of ballots that's going to represent. It is our most popular voting method, but the change in state law says that the county boards cannot close those tabulators and upload those results until after the polls close. That is a change in our processes. So those early voting results will be uploaded throughout the night along with election day results. Election day results will start coming in to the County Board of Elections. They are physically transported. We do not modem results in North Carolina. So when the polls close, we were first going to address that there may be voters in line at 7:30 p.m. And if they are, they will be permitted to vote. And so until all voters have voted that were in line at 7:30 p.m., the voting officials will not close down their polling places until we are complete with voting. They will then secure everything, set it up for transport back to the County Board of Elections, and close down their sites. They will transport them to the County Board of Elections, which we have to be mindful may be a 45-minute to an hour drive for some counties, depending on how remotely located some of these polling places are to the county board. And then as the county boards receive those results, they will do a comparison to the tapes to make sure that what they're uploading is accurate on are the results that are coming from that polling place, another added layer of security. And so therefore the bulk of results are going to come into those county boards, all 100 counties, mostly between 9:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. on election night. And so we just ask for patience. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of review that has to happen. And especially with the kind of turnout that we're seeing in North Carolina. So we do expect that the vast majority of the unofficial results for election night will be in our system and available to the public by 11 p.m. But we do often have circumstances where we will see some votes be a little bit later. But we managed to get all results posted and out for the public by 12:28 a.m. Back in 2020. And so I think y'all know me well enough. I like to see us set records and continuously improve. So my goal is that we're ahead of that timeline. But if not, I think everyone needs to just remember, we are following the methodical processes set in place, the chain of custody, the verifications, everything that we need to do to ensure that we are producing accurate results and uploading those for the public as we close out election night. Speed is not the objective here. We are not instant in what we do. We are accurate in what we do. And to have results out, the vast majority of election results from North Carolina, most likely 98% of our ballots that will be part of this election will be out to the public on election night as part of the unofficial results before we go into the certification period for the next 10 days afterwards.
Kurt and everyone else on this call, I'll let Paul go in a second, but we did put out a press release the other day called 9 Facts about the vote counting and reporting process in North Carolina. It's on our website in the media section. It has lots of details about how all this works. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Pat. And what I was just going to say is covered in that press release, so commend it to you all. But Karen mentioned how the vast majority are going to be reported election night. By law, there will be some ballots that will not be counted on election night. By North Carolina law, there will be absentee ballots that arrive to the County Board of Elections on election day, which is the last day the ballot can come into that office. Those ballots do not get counted that arrive that day. Those don't get counted on election day. Those get counted during the canvass period, sometime in that 10-day period between election day and the county canvass, the certification meeting 10 days later. Additionally, there are ballots, absentee ballots from the military, and U.S. citizens who are living abroad. Those ballots can arrive during the canvass period if they're mailed. So any ballots that get mailed from abroad from U.S. citizens and military members will be counted during that canvass period as well. It's usually a smaller set, but will be some ballots. And then finally, there's a significant number of ballots that the county boards will need to review called provisional ballots. And everybody on this call, I'm sure, is familiar with provisional voting. Provisional voting usually occurs when someone goes to a precinct and they're not on the registration records. In North Carolina, if someone goes to the wrong precinct in their county, they can still vote a provisional ballot, and every contest that they're eligible to vote in based on their residence will be counted. So those provisional meetings will determine whether those voters actually were registered and eligible to vote, and the county boards will adjudicate those ballots and include those in the ultimate tabulation at the canvass meeting. This year is the first year we're going to have the photo ID law in effect for a general election, much less a presidential general election. So what that means for provisional voting is that anyone who does not show an acceptable form of photo ID when they go to vote in person has the option to vote a provisional ballot there on the spot. And they can either claim an exception to showing photo ID based upon a reasonable impediment or reason they're unable to show that ID, and they fill out a form and sign under penalty of perjury why they were not able to show their ID. Those ballots will get reviewed as well by the County Board of Elections. Additionally, if you don't have an acceptable photo ID, you have the option to vote that provisional ballot and instead bring your ID back to the County Board of Elections to show the County Board of Elections office your ID to be sure that your ballot does count. You have to do that before the county canvass meeting, so the day before the county canvass meeting. So it's a 9-day deadline after Election Day for bringing your ID back. So what this means is that the number of provisional ballots that we're going to see this election may be higher than we're accustomed to, because this is the first time we're going to have a presidential general election with this new category of provisional ballots. So just wanted to flag that for everybody on the call, and to be aware that there will be, various categories of ballots that by law must be counted during the canvass period, cannot be counted election night.
Okay, let's hope all the questions don't take this long, or we'll be here till Tuesday. Russ Bowen, you're next. Russ, you should be able to unmute. Go ahead, Russ.
Quick question, and I think that Paul hit on this just a little bit. On election night, as far as those ballots that are absentee ballots from the 25 Western counties that are dropped off at county boards of elections or at voting sites on election day that are then later sent overnight to their respective counties, will we know that night specifically how many absentee ballots have been cast that are going back to those counties, those 25 counties, or is that all lumped in with the absentee ballots period across statewide as far as numbers go? And just to reiterate what I think Paul said, but I just want to make sure I'm clear, that we won't know those results correct until canvassing. Is that right?
So we have been logging and date stamping and time stamping the ballots that have been dropped off at other county boards of elections for the voters from Helene affected counties. And those have been, as you said, transmitted overnight, next business day, to the home or issuing county board of elections for whatever county board may have been in receipt. So those have been making their way back to the county boards of elections. If received in time for their absentee board meetings, then they have been included in those absentee board meetings, the absentee ballots that are processed during those meetings. So potentially, some of those have already been processed and will be part of the tabulation on election day. Now, since a voter can drop that off on election day by 7:30 p.m., then the ones that have not made it to their respective county boards will be sent out. Again, they are stamped and logged, and they will be sent out to the home or issuing county board of elections so that those remaining ones can be dealt with during the canvassing period. But if they have received them as they conduct their absentee board meetings, then they have been able to include those in the count. And then what was your next question, Russ? I should have written it down.
Sorry, I just unmuted Russ again.
Sorry.
Russ,
Yeah, I was just asking, the second question was, will we know county by county, as far as those 25 counties are concerned, how many outstanding absentee ballots have been, cast on election day outside that respective county, as a breakdown within those 25 counties, if I'm making sense?
You are. So we have a log of, how many have been received per county, when they were sent by, and the receiving county, the issuing county, home county can account for which ones have already been counted or which ones would be left to be counted in the canvass period.
Right. That answers my question. It's all pertaining to how close this election may be, and that could be a factor all the way to November 15th. Thanks, Karen, as always.
You're welcome. And for everyone's knowledge, we also get a count of the provisional ballots, and we have a log or a report on how many provisional ballots are being considered during the canvass period, and that's issued following election day, so that everyone's aware of the ballots that are still in consideration for those close contests.
Yeah, that provisional ballot tally will come out the day after election day, likely the afternoon after election day.
Colin from our communications team just put in the chat the link to the ballots that have been dropped off at counties outside voters' home county. So you should be able to go to that and see how many we have currently. The counties are supposed to update that every day, and that's updated on our website every day as well. So you can see how many ballots have been turned in elsewhere. And I'm told it's up to date as of this morning. That spreadsheet is. We're going to go to Rusty Jacobs, WUNC. Rusty, you should be able to unmute and go ahead.
First, so far during early voting, have you seen a concerning number of incidents involving either aggressive electioneering or harassment or intimidation of either voters or poll workers?
We've seen very limited cases. I wish I could say there were none, but we've seen very limited cases. Nothing out of the ordinary is what I would characterize it as.
And just as a follow-up, how high would you say your alert level is for post-election unrest? I mean, gatherings outside the state elections board office, or directly related to results and the process.
Certainly. And I will clarify that pretty much what we've seen as incidents at voting sites have not been directed at election officials. It's mostly still been, activity in the electioneering area, the campaigning area, and limited to that. We have not had issues inside of the polling places or anything directed particularly at election officials that have been harassing or threatening. And that's good. And in terms of post-election, we're well aware that we're a battleground state, and there are a lot of eyes on North Carolina, not only for presidential contests, but because we have so many new elected officials that'll be coming into our state leadership, new governor, new lieutenant governor, new attorney general, and on down. And so we have had to consider what happened to our colleagues in other states like Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and recognize that, while we hope that we are not subjected to that, we hope that no one subjects an election official to death threats or threatening behavior or protests outside of their election sites or offices. That is not acceptable. Those are crimes, and people have been prosecuted for such. But knowing that this has happened, that means it could happen again. And so we have learned from those individuals and tried to implement safeguards and safe practices that can help us be ready if we were to come under such attacks. And so, that includes, it varies across the offices as to what they need. But, in some cases, it's panic buttons. Some offices have installed bulletproof glass. Some have changed the makeup of their entryways to still be transparent in their processes, but limit access into secure areas, things of that nature. But those are the precautions that we have taken. We also have, for the safety of the voters, but also the safety of election officials, we have worked closely with local, state, and federal law enforcement officers so that if necessary, they can be called in to protect our voting sites or our election offices.
Will Thomas, WTKR. Will, go ahead and unmute.
BTKR in the Outer Banks. Question just from your office's perspective with this type of turnout. Can you talk to me about what y'all are seeing as kind of what's causing this, or your thoughts on this record turnout?
Well, we set records in 2020, even through a pandemic. We had a 75% turnout, and obviously a lot of people voted absentee by mail during that time frame. But we still saw the most people turn out during early voting, and we continue to see that election after election. And so we prepare that we are going to have busy early voting sites throughout the entire early voting period. And we have seen that, and I don't think that the remaining 2 days will be any exception to that. We know that there are voters who do prefer to vote on election day, and so we are prepared for those individuals. I mean, the good thing about that is that there's so many more sites, so it's more dispersed. And so when we're expecting about 1 million people for election day, then we should be pretty good in terms of line management and so forth. The counties have done an exceptional job of identifying the right ratio of sites to voters in this election. And for the most part, we have not seen tremendously long lines. A lot of them have implemented wait time trackers to help people know where there might be shorter lines. And of course, with early voting, individuals can go to any site in their county to vote. Election day, they need to go to their election day site. But I think, the reality is that this is a profession for us. And so our work is to figure out the logistics, to figure out the line management, to figure out the site management, and to prepare for 100% turnout. I don't know that we'll ever see that, but we would love to see that. And if we break that 75% turnout that we had in 2020, all the better. We're ready for it.
Thank you.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to go to some questions in the chat from Tom George, ABC 11. What happens if you forget your identification? That's the first one, and then he's got a couple more. But I'll let you take them one at a time. I'll ask you.
So thanks for putting those in the chat when there's multiple questions. So what happens if you forget your identification? So with North Carolina voting, we do require a photo ID be presented when you present yourself to vote, or if you're voting absentee by mail. There are many IDs that are acceptable forms of IDs, so they may not have forgotten every possible ID. Most will present their driver's license. There's also the option for military and veteran IDs, passport. There are many university and community college IDs that are acceptable, as well as government and public sector employee IDs that are permitted. All of that can be found at bringitnc.gov for the full list of acceptable forms of ID. But if someone does forget their ID or has not been able to obtain an ID, then there is an exception form that allows them to still vote, and they'll cast a provisional ballot. If they forgot their ID and they want to present that to the County Board of Elections, they can do so during the canvass period, during the 9 days before we canvass on November the 15th. Or they can complete the exception form, which does include the option of natural disaster as the reason they could not present ID, which of course we expect to see from many individuals in Western North Carolina.
All right, his next question is, how are they handling long lines? Will there be wait times?
I addressed this a little bit, but I think, many county boards of elections have put in wait time trackers and are updating those on their county board websites. So we certainly encourage people to check in on those. But we're not hearing of tremendously long lines. I think, one of the benefits of how we're structured for early voting in North Carolina is that the counties have the option to have multiple sites or to have large sites so that they can process more voters. As early voting has continued to be the most popular voting method in North Carolina, our county boards have adjusted for that and how they accommodate voters, how they decide on sites that have sufficient parking, sufficient space for more voting booths, for more check-in stations. And so, we don't discourage voters from turning out just because there's a line. We encourage them, bring a chair if you need to, bring your water if you need to. And it's really been nice to see the camaraderie that we see among voters as they stand in line. And they talk about this. They send us thank you notes about this, of how pleasant a process it has been. So, but knock on wood, for the most part, no one's having to wait much more. The longest lines we're hearing typically are 20 to 30 minutes. It's a rare exception when it's any longer than that. And most are getting through in 5 to 10 minutes.
I will add that it may be a little bit longer on the last day. It's always really busy on the last day. So
This is true.
there may be a little bit longer waits in some areas tomorrow. And then what happens if you show up at the wrong polling site?
So, this could be a couple of situations. If you're voting early, you have to show up at the county of your registration, at any early voting site of your county, in the county where you're registered to vote. So there's no wrong polling site unless you go outside of your county during early voting. On election day, you are to go to your precinct polling place, and they can identify that by using our voter search tool on ncsbe.gov. But we touched on this in Paul's comments. If a voter shows up at the wrong election day voting site, they will be offered the option to vote a provisional ballot, which means they may not be receiving the ballot style that they would have received in their correct polling location. So we would only be able to count the contests that they are eligible for. This comes in to play when you think about legislative districts or commissioner districts, something of that nature. They could also go to their correct election day polling site if they so choose, and we can direct them from the location where they show up to where they actually should be going.
We're going to go to AP Dillon, North State Journal. AP, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Turned away from the early voting locations, and the courts had to intervene and rectify the situation. Have we had anything like that arise here in North Carolina?
Part of your question was cut off. Are you talking about the situation in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, they had some voters that were turned away from the polls, and the courts had to get involved and rectify that. Have we had any reports of that going on here in North Carolina?
I don't know all the details of the Pennsylvania situation, but that is a very Pennsylvania specific situation, and I'll leave it with that. In North Carolina, we do not turn away voters from our early voting sites. That's an established period for all 100 counties. I think that is also a difference in what has occurred maybe in Pennsylvania. So we'll just go with the fact that in North Carolina, early voting began on October 17th. It goes until Saturday, November the 2nd, when all sites across the state will close at 3 p.m. At this point, there's no concern around whether a county was open for a Saturday or a Sunday. That's past us. All sites will be open Saturday. And, if we do not want anyone to be turned away. Now, if they show up in a county where they are not a registered voter, then obviously we want them to be able to have their vote count. And so we would direct them to their proper county of registration during the early voting period. But if at any point someone is adamant that they want to vote right then and there, we will offer them a provisional ballot. Obviously, it would be limited in our ability to count that. And in most cases, if they're in the wrong county, it's not going to be counted. But we do not have a circumstance that I'm aware of where someone's been turned away from the opportunity to vote. in North Carolina.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We're going to go to Julia Kaufman. I think you're in here under WCNC Charlotte. I'm going to unmute WCNC Charlotte. And if that's Julia, go ahead and ask your question. Should be able to unmute now. Julia, I'm going to try one more time. WCNC Charlotte. Okay, we're gonna move on, and hopefully we can get that corrected. Or Julia, you can put your question in the chat as well. We'll go to Chelsea Torres from Fox News. Chelsea should be able to unmute.
So I was out at the Buncombe County location in Black Mountain with the tent site, and voters there were telling me how happy they are that these tent sites are available. One concern they had was that they thought people would not actually vote at all because they are not able to make it to some of the sites. So they were happy with those tents. However, I'm curious, are you guys still hearing concerns from voters in areas that are hard hit about not being able to get to a polling site? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Actually, as we've mentioned, Western North Carolina is outpacing the rest of the state in terms of their turnout for early voting. And then in terms of election day, the vast majority of sites will be open in Western North Carolina, after, remarkable work by state emergency management, the power companies, the DOT, so many others, and the election officials to make sure voting would be available. We have worked to even narrow down isolated communities where people might be having issues having access, and we've communicated to those voters their options to vote absentee by mail, but we do have voting sites set up. One of those is a precinct that's cut off in Haywood County. There are some secondary roads that can get them there instead of I-40, which is their normal way of coming and going through Haywood County. There's about 22 voters that are in that precinct, and we've worked with them, and they will have voting on election day. There's a community in Yancey County where there's about 100 folks. You have to cross the river in a four-wheel drive vehicle to get to that area of that county, and they already had a relief tent set up, and we are going to use that tent. And we've got workers, individuals in that community who agreed to be trained. They had not been poll workers in the past, to my knowledge, but they said, if you'll train us, we will make it happen for our neighbors. And so we are crossing that river in a four-wheel drive vehicle to make sure that voting happens. So I hope that illustrates the determination that we have had to make sure that we get voting to the people. And we are not aware that there's going to be any limitations to voters in Western North Carolina to be able to cast their ballot.
I'm going to skip Paul Garber for a second because I don't see him in the attendee list, and trying to see if he's the call-in user on here. So Lynn Bonner from NC Newsline has some questions in the chat. Will there be cutoff time Wednesday morning when you stop updating the results website?
All votes that are eligible to be reported on election night will be reported. I mentioned my goal is 12:28 a.m. Wednesday morning or better, but if it means we're still uploading results at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, we will do so. So any ballot that can be counted on election day and provided as part of the results, we will do so. And then we will move into our canvass period where we can consider the ballots that we've mentioned, provisional ballots, the absentee by mail ballots that were received on election day, or those that were delivered by Helene affected counties to a county outside of the region or outside of their county of registration. We'll get those in, and then we'll deal with the ballots that are permitted from military and U.S. citizens that are abroad. All of these are permitted by law to be considered during the canvass period. So all votes that are counted election day and up to election day will be uploaded on election night.
Lynn's second question, I think, has been answered. Is how many voters from the Helene counties have dropped off ballots
Yep.
at the state board office, early voting sites, or county elections office. Lynn, that link is in the chat. The next question for her is how long does it take for all ballots delivered outside voters' counties to make it to their home counties? Karen, if you want to try with that one.
Okay, how long?
I think she's just asking, the ballots actually have to be delivered from one county to another. How long does that take? I think it's going to depend. It's going to vary, but go ahead.
Yeah, so, I take it that you're talking about ballots have been dropped off at a county other than the issuing county for the voter in Western North Carolina that's been affected by Helene. We've been instructing the counties, within one business day to send those to the issuing or home county. And so, that's going to depend on, are we talking about Craven County sending a ballot to Madison County? They may send it by trackable mail, FedEx, UPS, something of that nature. And that's just going to depend on what the service allows for in terms of delivery. But I would say, within 1 to 3 days, knowing how most of those services work.
All right, Lynn's next question. If there are protest complaints concerning voter fraud, will county boards report to your office how many complaints have been filed, by whom, and against whom? And I'm assuming Lynn's talking about challenges here, like voter challenges and or election protests. So we could probably cover both of those.
Yeah, I'll let Paul chime in if there's anything he wants to add to it. But yes, we request that even if it's a local challenge or protest, that we be notified at the state level, even if it's a local contest. So we should have knowledge of that information. Paul, is there anything you want to add to that?
As I see that you put in the chat that it's about voter challenges. Generally, yes, that's the case, especially if it's any sort of large scale voter challenges. We don't necessarily get a report on every challenge that, for example, a county board might make to voters. So the county boards will do sort of administrative challenges during the canvass process to voters who the records clearly show are not eligible. So if they get records of voters serving a felony sentence or voters who have died since they voted, for example, the county boards have a process to collect that information from our data and make challenges to voters when that occurs. And we don't necessarily get every single one of those, but certainly any sort of larger scale challenges, the counties have been instructed to let us know about that.
Last question from Lynn. How have you used the $5 million appropriated for Helene counties?
So there were several categories that we lumped or we designated for the $5 million. Most of that has been put towards printing and communications. We did a PSA and ad campaign to make sure that the voters were aware that voting is open in Western North Carolina and what their options are. And so that was radio, print, digital, and social media that we did for that, and some billboards, both digital and actual. And so there's that. The counties are completing reimbursement forms for some of the things that they've purchased. Some of it's laptops where they needed additional check-in sites, or they opened up additional early voting sites, things of that nature. I mean, even surge protectors and power strips have been part of that. So there's a variety of things. A lot of it centers around technology, so that we could get them up and running when they didn't have internet. We had our attack response kits that have been designated for cybersecurity, but we needed to expand that to make sure that we had all the services and needs met. And so those are the primary things. We have been able to help them with some personnel to help here at the state board in response. There's also some site things, but a lot of that we've coordinated and sourced through state emergency management. But there are still, site remedies at some of the facilities that may not be a blank slate tent that's been set up, but they may be needing some things at some of the sites that were not damaged, but perhaps need cleaning or something of that nature, to where we can help provide the funds for that too.
All right, we're going to go to Paul Garber's question in the chat. Sorry, Paul, I hadn't refreshed my attendee list, and that's why you weren't showing up, but you're here now. Paul's question is about the high country counties of Yancey, Ashe, and Avery. You mentioned the tents in Yancey. I understand there have been precinct changes in Ashe and Avery. How are you getting word out about those changes, and what has been the biggest challenge to make the adjustments?
There are a lot of ways that we're trying to communicate out. Many of the counties in the 25 region needed to make adjustments to the site within their precinct, or transfer the voters or the polling place to another site, maybe making dual use of a site. In our initial resolution from the state board, and then through the Disaster Relief Act, we have continued with the guidance that they should still mail to those voters, as we would do in any circumstance where we have a change in polling place or voting sites. So that's gone out. There have been other communications, including signage that will be at these sites, PSAs and things, notices that have been posted in relief areas by the county offices. So we are hopeful. It was a minimum number of those changes, and so we're hoping that by being able to maintain either at the site that they're accustomed to or very close by, that we will limit any confusion for the voter about where their election day sites are located.
All right, we're Kenneth Lee. I believe your question's been answered. It's about the timing of election night results. If you go to our website under the media section, there's a very detailed press release that I mentioned earlier. Well, we can have Colin put that in the chat if he doesn't mind. So there's a direct link to it that really explains the process, both election night and in the days that follow, for counting and reporting election results. Sarah Michaels, we will go to you. Hold on one second. All right, Sarah, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Quick question. So in the ongoing ballot selfie case, if I'm reading it correctly, the court is allowing Susan Hogarth to take ballot selfies. But if anybody else does that, can and will they still be prosecuted for this election?
Since this is a legal matter, I'm going to ask Paul to respond to that one.
So the court entered an order that was by the consent of the district attorney in Wake County, where the district attorney indicated that she would not prosecute the plaintiff if the plaintiff were to take a ballot selfie and broadcast that. It's still against the law to do that. That order applied only to that one plaintiff by agreement by the district attorney in Wake County. And every voting site across the state has been instructed that photography in the voting site is strictly prohibited unless under certain very, very specific circumstances. Broadcasting the image of a voted ballot is against the law in North Carolina. And we continue to provide that information to anyone who has questions about it, or to anyone who misunderstands the law. It is still against the law to post your image of a voted ballot.
And let me just add, I'm going to sound very old school and very curmudgeonly, but we really do ask voters to not do ballot selfies. There are selfie stations where it says, at a lot of our voting sites, where you can broadcast that you've got your I voted sticker, that you've been to this polling place and you've cast your ballot. But there are legitimate reasons why everyone should be very mindful of the importance of a secret ballot. And a ballot selfie erodes that. Taking a picture of how you have voted, is the intent of that law is still there, because we have had circumstances in the history of our country of people, bosses, influencing how their employees vote, or if it affecting whether they maintain their job or not. Vote buying because of images, or someone nefariously swapping out ballots. These are practices of old that we think are very antiquated, but in the day and age of our phones going into the voting booth with us and people being able to capture an image, they are setting themselves up for possible harassment, for possible intimidation, for possible ramifications in their employment, and we don't want that to be the circumstance. Proudly say you voted by taking a selfie outside of the polling place with your I voted sticker, or with the backdrop that's been provided in a lot of these counties. And yes, communicate out to your friends and your family that how proud you are that you've participated in the process, and encourage others to do the same. But having a picture of your ballot is not necessary to encourage people to vote. And if you want to state how you voted, that's your prerogative. But taking a picture of your ballot is against the law, and it is problematic. And we don't want a problematic situation for our voters. So think beyond that immediate, instant gratification of taking that picture, and think about the long-term ramifications of what that could present for you or for others.
All right, let's go to Michael Hewlett. Michael should be able to unmute and ask your question. Try one more time, Michael. Michael Hewlett, are you there? Go ahead, Michael. I think we can hear you now. Go ahead.
I think my question was answered.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We will go to Annie Dance, Cops in Congress. Annie, are you there?
For taking my question. Can you clarify the rules around carrying a gun legally at the polls? Thanks.
Sorry, I didn't realize I had muted myself. Paul, please chime in I see you've come on, if you want to respond to that, and I'll chime in if I need to.
Sure. So it all depends on whether you can carry a firearm at a voting site. All depends on what type of site it is. So a lot of voting sites are located in government buildings, and a lot of government buildings don't allow firearms. Also, a lot of voting sites are located in schools, and no school property allows firearms. So that's a categorical prohibition there. But if it's not in one of those sites, a lot of voting sites are also located on private property, especially on election day. Churches, other private locations, nonprofit organizations, etc. And it would depend on that private organization and their rules for their building, whether that's allowed. We ask any sites that have restrictions to generally post those restrictions before the voters enter the site, so they're aware of it. So it's going to depend, as I said, on sort of the nature of the building. Even for those sites where firearms are not prohibited because of the nature of the site, we do ask voters to be mindful of the laws against voter intimidation. So, the way a voter is carrying a firearm and what they're doing with it and showing to voters matters a lot. And our voting sites have to be accessible to and safe to and welcoming of all voters, no matter where they come from, no matter what the background is. And so, if anyone shows up to a voting site and is brandishing a firearm in a way that is intimidating to voters, that is a crime. That is against the law. And our election officials have been instructed to step in and ask them not to do that, or call in law enforcement if it's necessary. But hopefully that's not the case. It's generally not been the case in the history of our elections here recently. But those are the general rules that would govern.
All right, Dan Parson from Southeast Politics, question in the chat. Will you address the various threats to the SBE and county election offices so far? And is there more attempted interference in this election than previously?
Generally, we have not faced actual threats. We've experienced more harassment, hostility, vitriol. We have had circumstances where someone indicated someone would be murdered, but they didn't direct it towards an official here at the state office. So that was a difficult situation to deal with. That was a few years back. We've had, vulgar emails sent to us and things of that nature. But for the most part, we have maintained at a level that would not rise to an actual threat. But, I think we were very mindful that the overall landscape has ratcheted up in a way that there is a lot more rhetoric and vitriol and harassment and hate directed at election officials. All in all, with this election, it has been remained civil, and we're thankful for that, and we hope that people will keep it at a civil and peaceful level as we continue voting and even in the post-election processes.
All right, another question in the chat. I just lost it. Hold on one second. From Casey Clark. What happens if a county refuses to certify? What comes next? Could it hold up the state awarding its presidential electors?
I'll certainly let Paul chime in on this if he wants to add to it. But our law says that our county board members shall certify the election, and they have taken an oath to do so. Now, if there's evidence that an election should be called into question, that would affect the outcome of an election, then we can certainly consider that. And the State Board of Election has called for a new election. It was unprecedented and something that had not been done in modern times when we called for a new election in Congressional District 9. But all in all, we do not have those circumstances. And we've seen throughout the conduct of elections in North Carolina that the county boards and the state boards are generally unanimous in their support of the election and in their certification. And when they have not been, we still have had a majority of the county board members to certify the election. And we fully anticipate to be able to put before them accurate and secure elections that have been conducted freely and fairly for the people of North Carolina, and they will be able to certify those with full confidence. So that's what our law indicates. And so we anticipate those county board members on November the 15th to certify the election, and on November 26th for the state board to do the same. Now, there's obviously situations where we may still be in a recount or a protest concerning a particular contest because it's too close to call. We'll continue those processes, and then we'll go through the certification process where we present the evidence of this election for that contest having been completed securely and fairly and accurately as well. And we'll certify that separate from the certification dates if it's too close to call. Paul, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'll just reiterate what Karen said, which is that the county board members by law are required to certify the vote tallies from their county. That's not a discretionary duty. That's something they just have to do because it's required under North Carolina law. There are legal processes, like Karen said, when an election is called into question. That's an election protest or a recount. And those are the legal processes, have very specific procedures that have to happen very quickly, but they are processes in law where someone alleges that some irregularities that would have resulted in a different result in the election occurred. Now, absent that, though, there is no basis for a county board of elections to withhold certification of the vote tallies. And when that did happen a couple of years ago, in one county in North Carolina where 2 members refused to certify, although the majority of the board did certify the election, there were 2 members who did not. The State Board of Elections, in a unanimous bipartisan decision, voted to remove those 2 board members because they were not fulfilling their duties under law. So we do not anticipate this to recur because the State Board has taken a strong stance on this in a bipartisan fashion. But the law is pretty clear on this, that they have to determine what the vote tallies are and certify those tallies.
Two more things real quick, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up. There's a question in the chat from Aram Roston. Following up on the early questions, I understand county boards notify you of challenges. How many challenges have come up? How many challenges have come up in early voting so far? I don't think any that I'm aware of, but Paul or Karen?
I'm not aware of any. I think there may be some administrative challenges that the county boards are dealing with where we've been notified of their passing and need to remove their ballot for being deceased before election day, but I'm not sure of things much beyond that. Paul, are you aware of anything?
That's right. The only ones I'm aware of are these administrative challenges for the reason Karen mentioned, or if you've got a potential double vote situation, or somebody who's serving a felony sentence and voted early voting, perhaps by mistake. Regardless whether it's a mistake or not, the counties will catch that and have an administrative process to challenge that ballot if the voter was ineligible. And aside from that, we've not heard of any voter-initiated challenges at the early voting sites.
Then Julia Kaufman had a question in the chat about Black voter turnout. We generally just provide data and let the political scientists, media people opine on what it means. Julia, please reach out to me directly if you need help, analyzing our data. We'll be happy to do that, but we generally don't comment on those types of questions. And then there was one more question that Paul or Karen could probably address. It's in the chat. What are specific circumstances where photography and videography is allowed, I assume, in a polling place based on the last question or recent question?
Yeah, and I provided that in the chat. It's a statute that I provide a link to and just provides very specific circumstances.
Got it. Anybody else have a question? If not, we're going to end right now. Actually, there's another question from Kurt from CNN in the chat. If there's time, have there been any instances of attempted foreign cyber interference at the state or local level in recent weeks? Breaches or attempted breaches?
Kurt, I'm hesitant to answer your question. I'm afraid you're going to jinx us, but I can happily report no. There have not been any instances of attempted foreign cyber interference or at the state or local level within recent weeks. Really, we have not had an attack directly on elections, any kind of ransomware or anything of that nature. We have had some circumstances where some county governments or municipal governments have had issues with ransomware attacks or something of that nature, where we have intervened to keep the county election offices operational, which is actually how our attack response kits that have been used in support of Hurricane Helene, those attack response kits, ARCs, came about so that we could support those counties when they've had issues at the county government or municipal government level to keep their operations going. But no direct attack now or in the past towards elections.
All right, I think that's it. There was a question in the chat about will we send out the video? Yes, we will. Just send me an email if you need it. We'll post it on our website. Definitely in the Helene, ncsbe.gov/Helene site and maybe elsewhere as well. But if you need a copy, it'll be posted as soon as it downloads shortly. With that, I think we'll end this press availability. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Karen. And thanks, everybody, for being on.
Thanks, everyone. Remember to go vote yourselves, wherever you're a registered voter.
Twice a year. So Ben Thompson, not here, but here to connect the